Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 9 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline. And if you would like to see this on a weekly basis, do make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also make sure to drop a like on the video as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So of course, for pretty much every single thing we're going to discuss today, my advice would be to wait for the press conferences and, to be honest, to wait as late as possible as well before the deadline, because we could get some early team news. And if you do want to see my final decisions and my final opinions around any of this, if you are able to, do make sure to tune into the deadline stream. I start my deadline stream every single week around 2 hours before the deadline, and we stream right up to the deadline as well. So if we do get any updated stuff in the press conferences or we get some early team news, I will cover it in that deadline stream. But one of the key things to discuss is around the South Americans. Now, all of the South Americans that went to play on international duty were playing in South America, and pretty much most of them were playing on Wednesday morning UK time. So basically like Tuesday night, i.e. early hours of Wednesday morning around 2 or 3 a.m. And this went for the likes of Darwin, for Diaz, for Alvarez, etc. And we are now wondering, are they going to be available for Game Week 9, especially given that the likes of Manchester City and Liverpool do play early on Saturday. Good news, potentially, that actually all of the players that I've just mentioned look like they are in training as of today, and I'm recording this on Thursday. If their teams also train on Friday, which is usually the case, that means they would have got a Thursday training session and a Friday training session. So you can see the top tweet there says that actually Cody Gakpo is back in training after his injury, but also Darwin, McAllister, Diaz and Alisson are back in training as well. So we'll discuss that one first. Salah plays every game for Liverpool. He will start on that right wing, and I think every single Premier League game is available. So that position is locked. Jota obviously isn't South American, so he didn't have to travel very far. And actually, he didn't play in Portugal's final game, which I believe was on Monday. So not only did he not have to travel as far, not only was the final game on Monday, he also didn't even start. And he's been suspended recently, which means he didn't play their most recent Premier League game. So Jota just hasn't had a lot of travel or minutes. So I think it makes a lot of sense to probably play Jota as well. So what we're left with is Salah in one position, Jota in the other position, and then one position left in that front three for one of Diaz, Darwin, or Gakpo. Now, we have seen Gakpo play midfield at points, so that is a possibility, but I think more likely than not, there's just one spot left for one of those three. If Gakpo's fully fit, there is a chance that he plays there, but Klopp doesn't always rush players back post-injury. So let's say that Gakpo is available, but maybe Klopp doesn't want to start him, then one of Diaz and Darwin will start. I would say that based on the quotes that we've seen previously, Darwin, I think that Klopp sees Diaz as someone that recovers a lot quicker and can play quite a lot of minutes. But I feel like Darwin is in better form. I think he's playing very well. I mean, even for Uruguay, I think he scored against Brazil. He looks very, very good at the moment. And on top of that, I think Jota is actually better off the left. So I think if we're looking like tactically and performance-wise, I think it would make sense to play Darwin. But obviously, I think if we're looking sort of recovery and fitness-wise, maybe Diaz will be the one that gets the nod. All of that to say, Liverpool are the early kickoff. So Liverpool's kickoff is 12:30. Obviously, the deadline is at 11 a.m. And Liverpool are a team that we often get team leaks for. So I think there is a very good chance that we find out before the deadline what that starting 11 looks like for Liverpool. For me, at the moment, I would lean towards saying that Darwin doesn't start. But this makes me think the fact that he's back in training on Thursday, and then obviously he'll have Friday's session as well, that there is actually a small chance that he does start as well. I'd love to know what you think of that down below. And then all that we've got on Man City at the moment is there are a few accounts suggesting, nothing like extremely reliable, but there are enough accounts suggesting it, that Ederson, Alvarez, Walker, Phillips and Stones and Foden are all expected to join training today, which again is on Thursday, after their recovery sessions yesterday, which sounds like maybe they got some kind of recovery in on the Wednesday evening, on the Wednesday afternoon, and then they're back in full training on Thursday. So basically, all of the South Americans that we're worried about look like they're in training on Thursday and Friday, which gives them a good chance to start. With Alvarez, I am slightly worried just because he has played a lot of minutes, and also Pepper's got close to a fully fit squad now, with a lot of the attackers returning. So I think he could get away with benching Alvarez. So I've actually gone from being really worried about Darwin and not at all about Alvarez to kind of the other way now. And I think there is a chance both or either Alvarez and Darwin do miss out. And I, of course, own both of them in my team. So let's hope for some early team news, I guess. But I just wanted to cover this and say this looks like slightly better news than we were potentially anticipating, because there was a chance that they didn't even train on the Thursday and they'd only get the one session in on the Friday. Do let me know what you think of this down below, but maybe positive news. So we are staying on the subject of Liverpool. We're going to discuss Kostas Tsimikas. Now, the latest news around Robertson, of course, he has injured his shoulder, and it could be up to 10 weeks was the first information that we got. In fact, just before me recording this video, we did get an update from James Pearce over at Liverpool, and he said it really does depend on surgery. If there is no operation required for Robertson, it could be that he's only out for as long as about 4 to 6 weeks. And that if there is a surgery, which from rumours, and this is just rumours at the moment, it looks like a surgery is quite likely, then it could be that he's out for 10 to 12 weeks. So sadly at the moment, and again, I'm recording this on Thursday, we may get an update on Friday from Klopp or from someone else, it looks like it'd be between 4 and 12 weeks, which isn't particularly useful, but the rumours are suggesting it's more towards the 10 to 12 weeks, because as this tweet says, it would avoid the risk of it happening again and him damaging his shoulder once more. So let's say that it is towards the slightly longer end. Is Tsimikas an option? I'm less convinced by this for a couple of reasons. The first being that I don't think Liverpool's set up at the moment in a way where both fullbacks bomb on as we've seen in previous seasons. We've seen Robertson and Trent playing very high, very wide, and both of them getting lots of opportunities to get attacking returns. At the moment, it looks more like Trent's the one pushing on, whether that be inverted or playing a little bit wider, it doesn't really matter. And Liverpool play more like a kind of back three. We've seen Robertson at points this season. Whilst he does still get up the pitch, at large spells he is also playing as more of a kind of a left centre-back or a traditional left-back than more of a wing-back. So firstly, I don't think Tsimikas, based on what we've seen yet, unless Klopp does change the system, getting forward as much as he would have in the past if Robertson was injured. My other concern around Tsimikas is that I actually think that if that is the case, the system that I've just spoken about, I would argue that Gomez potentially suits that system more. Now, Gomez did come up through the Liverpool system playing at left-back at points, so he has played as a traditional left-back, but more so if they are playing this back three system where Trent inverts into midfield, as we've seen with the likes of Man City, and they play a back three, I would argue that Gomez at left centre-back is probably better than Tsimikas at left centre-back. Of course, that does mean that they don't have a left-footed defender in that back three, and a lot of coaches do try to they do like to have a right-footed defender on the right side and a left-footed defender on the left side. So maybe he still does play Tsimikas, but I feel like there's a little bit up in the air at the moment. So unless Klopp comes out in the press conference and says Robertson's out long-term and Tsimikas is perfectly capable of replacing him, something that explicit, I would want to see what happens in game week 9. Because if we see Gomez line up at left-back, even just in the Everton game, it would put me off slightly. But if Tsimikas comes straight in, there's a direct replacement for Robertson, that does look quite good. At 4.4 million, I think if you're on a wildcard or you really need a defensive player, really need a defender in FPL, and you only have up to sort of 4.5, 4.6, maybe Tsimikas is a fine option, especially if you have 3 other good defenders. But if you are reliant on Tsimikas playing every week because your other 2 defenders are like Kabore and Lamptey, it is a big risk to take when we don't really know exactly what that lineup's going to look like. But he does have the upside because he'll be on some set pieces potentially, and even if he is playing a sort of more like a left centre-back, I still feel like, as we've seen with Robertson, he will still get the opportunities to get up the pitch. So I don't hate it. I do think it's a risk at the moment when we have pretty limited information about how long Robertson's out for and exactly what Klopp will do in the absence of Robertson. But if it pays off and you're getting a starting fullback, I suppose, for Liverpool at 4.4, Liverpool's fixtures are exceptionally good. Their defence has actually improved this season as well. It could be a really nice risk to take. I would just be careful that you have a little bit of cover. If you're on a wild card, I think I'd be willing to take the risk. So the next thing I wanted to look at is just kind of teams that I think are worth targeting at the moment. In the next section, we're actually going to look at 1 week punts, especially if you're on a wildcard 10. But I just think it's useful to sort of refresh our understanding of the teams that we should be targeting in FPL, because there are some things being thrown about that certain teams are really, really weak and worth targeting, and also some stuff around defenses being really strong that just doesn't appear to be the case. So it's important to look at this stuff. And this graph was made by Barca JDP over on Twitter/X, whatever you'd like to call it. So feel free to go and check out that account. But I love graphs like this because it's very easy to see visually what we're looking at. Basically, if you're in the bottom left-hand side of the graph, because what we've got is expected goals conceded and expected goals, i.e. chances created and chances conceded as well. If you're in the bottom left-hand side, then you are the weak defense and a weak attack. If you're in the top left, you're a weak defense and a strong attack. Top right obviously means strong defense, strong attack, the very best teams. And then bottom right would be a strong defense, but maybe a slightly weaker attack. So really, the best teams are in the top right. So you can see Bayern Munich, because this is the big 5 European leagues, Bayern Munich are in a league of their own at the moment. And if you do watch the Bundesliga, it's just quite incredible. They're the best attack, the best defense, just comfortably dominating everything. But what we're looking at from an FPL perspective, we're looking at teams to target, is those teams that are in the bottom left are both a weak defense and a weak attack. And more importantly, if we're looking at sort of teams to target for our attackers, what we are looking at is those teams towards the left-hand side of the graph. So it doesn't really matter how high they got the graph, because that refers to their attacking ability. It's all of the teams on the left-hand side of the graph, i.e. furthest away from me. And you can see that there is one team that is just comfortably the worst team in the European 5 leagues at the moment, and that is Sheffield United. They are one of the worst, or they are the worst defense, and they are one of the worst attacks. But again, from an attacking perspective, if we're trying to attack these fixtures, they are a really, really poor defense. They are giving up around 2.5 expected goals every single game. So if there is a fixture to target at the moment, it is Sheffield United. And the reason that I say that is, for those of you looking for a one-week punt, as we'll discuss in the next section, Manchester United, whilst a team that aren't playing overly well at the moment, do play against Sheffield United this week, which looks like a great fixture. And then the week after that, Arsenal play against Sheffield United, and that's at home, and a lot of us don't own many Arsenal attackers. So at the moment, the fixture to target does look like it's Sheffield United, and I would really consider that when you're looking at attackers to bring in. After that, we're looking at probably Bournemouth as the second worst defence in the league. And again, a fixture, whilst Bournemouth are, again, as you can see here, still creating some chances themselves, they are conceding a hell of a lot of chances too. So we're looking at maybe Wolves players as well for Game Week 9. And beyond that, you can look at which teams play against Bournemouth and maybe even consider captaincy. Against them, this does show that Erling Haaland in Game Week 11 could be an exceptionally strong captaincy, which you probably didn't need me to say. But if you are toying with the idea of selling him, just think about Game Week 11. Looks really, really good. And then there are a few teams after Sheffield United and Bournemouth that I think it's worth discussing, right? The likes of Fulham, Luton, and maybe to some extent Burnley are teams that we know aren't the best defences, but this certainly doesn't suggest that they're as bad as the likes of Sheffield United or even Bournemouth. But Fulham, Luton, Burnley are in there. Wolves are still in there as well. So whilst we've seen some impressive attacking performances from Wolves, they're still giving up a lot of chances. And this would actually suggest that whilst they're an okay attack, i.e. they're about average, maybe slightly below, they're certainly not an outstanding attack. So we've seen some flair. We've seen the likes of Neto and Hwang doing very, very well. And even Cunha as well has had really nice performances at points this season. But they're still a defence that I would be happy to target. And then the one that I just wanted to draw your attention to is West Ham. Yes, their best fixtures are still to come, and they haven't had an easy start to the season, but they are, according to the data, the third or fourth worst defence in the Premier League this season. So if you are looking for West Ham defenders, you are really hoping that their form changes with the fixtures coming up. But this would also suggest that the likes of an Ollie Watkins or a Diaby, especially this week, but also in the future when teams play against West Ham, at the moment, this would suggest that it's actually not a terrible fixture. So really, I just wanted to say that this is probably Operation Target Sheffield United at the moment, but also the likes of Bournemouth, Wolves, Fulham, Luton, Burnley, and West Ham are also teams that may be worth targeting as well. So as I said, a lot of people looking at Game Week 9 one-week punts because they are playing to wildcard in Game Week 10. And if that is the case, here are some of the players that I might potentially be considering. I think you really do target the fixtures more so than data. So there are players on this list, such as a Højlund, who just doesn't have good data at all. But that doesn't really bother me because in a one-off week, anyone can score. And what I'm targeting more so in a one-off week is who has got the best fixture, because data is very, very useful at projecting who is likely to get points over a long spell of time. But we've seen at the start of the season, data can be wrong even over a 4 to 6 game week period. So I like data and I will use it to make long-term decisions for my team. But when it's a 1 or a 2 week punt, I'm so much more interested in the fixtures. So the kind of players that I am targeting is Gibbs-White, I think is an excellent option against Luton. Whilst Luton aren't the worst defence and whilst Nottingham Forest have definitely not been the best attack, I still feel like this is a decent fixture to target. And of course, Gibbs-White is on penalties. If you can get a penalty taker in a 1 week punt as well, I love that because all they need is a penalty and all of a sudden you've got great points. And if they get anything on top of that, as we saw with Salah last week, it can be very, very good. So Gibbs-White is a player that I like a lot. Højlund's data, absolutely shocking since coming to Manchester United, but he's passing the eye test. And as we spoke about in the past section, he is playing against Sheffield United, which is a reason that I like Bruno as well, because Bruno has the data, the penalties, the minutes, and the fixture. Of course, Bruno's not really a punt because he's 8.4 million and quite difficult to squeeze in. But if you have a spot in your team, maybe you've got like a Saka and there are doubts around him playing, which I don't know at the moment, or you just don't fancy the fixture, I don't mind a punt on Bruno. I've obviously got Hwang and Neto because as we spoke about, Bournemouth the second worst defence in the league this season and definitely a defence worth targeting. So I don't mind the idea of a punt on one of the Wolves midfielders. Mbeumo, I know, been very disappointing recently, but Burnley, again, aren't a great defence, and Mbeumo is on penalties. He is a 90-minute man as well, and I still feel like he could be a really nice option for Game Week 9. And then outside of that, I think arguably my favourite punt would be on a Liverpool attacker, assuming we get the team news, or assuming you maybe just want to take a risk on who you think will start. As I said, at the moment, I would expect it to be Salah, Jota, and then if Gakpo's fit, Gakpo. Otherwise, it will be one of Diaz or Darwin. So I would expect Jota to start. So maybe the safest punt, if you can't wait for early team news, is maybe Jota. But I would maybe say if we don't get any team news, I would just opt for one of the other players that you know will definitely start. And to be honest, it probably would be a Manchester United player, or maybe Mbeumo would be my favourite options there. Especially Bruno and Mbeumo, and to some extent Gibbs White. I love having a penalty taker. So those are some of the 1 week punts that I would consider. But to be honest, when it comes to taking a 1 week punt, I would be absolutely just trusting my gut feeling, because no one can predict what will happen in a one-off week. I find it a lot more easy to kind of predict what's going to happen over a longer spell. If you used to say try and predict how the next 4 to 6 weeks will go, I tend to be okay at that. That's why I'm making content and I tend to give okay advice. But in a one-off week, it's so difficult. So trust your gut feeling, have some fun with it, and bring in a player that you've just got a bit of a feeling could pop off in that week. So I think this question is both relevant to people that are looking to wildcard in 9 or 10, or maybe use their transfers to try and squeeze in a lot of the big guns. So if you have tried to build a team at the moment, and maybe even if your team value is not great, and you want to get in Salah, Haaland, Son, Saka, so those 4 big hitters, plus a Trippier or a Watkins into your team. So let's call it 5 big. You can't get all 6 in. I don't think so anyway, unless you've got insane team value or you make a lot of sacrifices. But if you want to try and get 5 of those into your team, you basically have to go for a cheap goalkeepers, cheap defense, and most importantly, you have to sacrifice your 7th attacker. So in a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-3, that final forward or that final midfielder has to be in and around 5 million, in some cases less than that. So a few people just wanted to know, like, is it viable? Do I like the idea of squeezing in 5 big hitters, sacrificing a little bit elsewhere, and most importantly, sacrificing that 7th attacker? I don't hate this when I'm thinking about the next 4 to 6 weeks and with that immediate team that you build with your wildcard, because Salah, Haaland, Son, Saka are all great. And for me, I've sacrificed Haaland because I just wanted to have a better squad all round. So I think if you're looking for sort of ultimate flexibility and a good structure, I think you just sacrifice one of those 4 biggest hitters. So I think one of Salah, Haaland, Son, Saka has to make way if you want a really flexible, well-built squad. If you are happy to have a thin bench and you're happy to make sacrifices, I don't mind it, because then the idea of getting those 4 in, plus also a Trippier and Watkins, it feels incredible, right? Because there is really very few players that can hurt your rank. You've got all of the big hitters, and you can also have some nice differentials in there as well. So I'm not going to talk you out of it, but just to say it's not for me. You'll very rarely see me try and squeeze all of the big hitters into a team and then go really cheap on the bench and really cheap in like a 7th attacker spot. And it's the reason that I dropped Haaland. I did not drop Haaland because I didn't think he's a good option. I'm terrified this week. I don't own Erling Haaland against Brighton at home. He's the best captaincy option. And I think it will be the same if you dropped Salah and you didn't have Salah, which we'll discuss at the end of the video, then you're not going to be happy about that. And if you have to lose one of Son or Saka, again, you're probably going to be unhappy about that. So I do get it, but just for me, you just got to almost just suck it up and just say, right, which one am I happy to drop, and how can that benefit my team? If you are going to go for it though, which again, I'm not going to talk you out of, it's just not for me. I think for me, it probably is Souček or Palmer. I really like the look of the 2 of them. Foster's got really good data, and Burnley's fixtures are a bit of a mixed bag over the sort of next 10 to 12 game weeks, but you could go for a Foster. Hwang is obviously really decent. He's scoring goals at the moment, but longer term, I'm not sure about his minutes, and his data doesn't necessarily support him as a fantastic option. And obviously, he is 5.4 million. So let's assume you've only got 5. I think your main options are Souček, Palmer, Foster, and I do prefer Souček and Palmer. Souček's the one with the fixtures. So if you're playing for the fixtures, you've got to go for Souček. And the reason that we are considering him at the moment is he is the one ahead of Ward-Prowse that is playing in that number 10 role, and he's just popping up in the box, and he's getting shots in the box. If you remember, I think it was the 2020-21 season, Souček scored something like 10 Premier League goals, and he was an absolutely brilliant asset. I think he started the season at 5 million. Correct me down below if I'm wrong, but that was a memorable season because he just kept popping up with goals, and he is a real goal threat. He scored in his last 2 Premier League games. He will take his chances. He's fantastic in the air as well, and we know how good Ward-Prowse is from set pieces. And if he's popping up in the boxes and getting chances, I genuinely do think if Souček stays in that number 10 role, which is of course the caveat that if he drops back all of a sudden he's not an option, but if he stays in that more advanced role, which we've seen Moyes do with the likes of Fellaini in the past, then I genuinely think you could get away with starting Souček almost every week. What I would look into in that case is in the weeks where you don't want to play him, or or maybe even just in weeks in general, is there a defender that you can tuck first sub that either rotates nicely with Souček, or in the weeks where you're not so sure, maybe there's rumours that Souček might drop deep or something like that, that you can play a defender instead? So you would be switching between almost like a 4-4-2 and a 3-5-2 based on that single week. But I like him. The data's good. Like I said, popping up in the box a lot. And the fixtures are there for Souček. So I think he would be probably top of my list. But I do like Cole Palmer. And I would argue that Chelsea are a better attack. I would say Cole Palmer is a slightly better FPL option. And on top of that, as far as we're aware, Cole Palmer's on penalties. I think he's taken 5 penalties in his career and he scored all of them. He obviously scored his recent penalty too. And there doesn't appear to be another standout option to take penalties for Chelsea. And you know how much I love a penalty taker. It feels a massive bargain getting a penalty taker for a decent attack for 4.9. And when we look longer term, sort of post-game week 15, Chelsea actually topped the fixture ticker. So if we're looking at long-term fixtures and you're thinking, this is a long-term structure that I want to go with in my team, Cole Palmer is probably the one, but there is a lot of time in between now and when Chelsea's fixtures start to improve around 14-15. So I would just question, are you losing points in the meantime? Because there are many weeks that you probably won't want to play him. So I think for now, the budget option I'd go for is Souček. Longer term, Cole Palmer. All of that to say, I would prefer dropping one of those big hitters and just going for a more well-balanced spot. And in that Souček or Palmer position, going for the likes of a Diaby or a Bowen, I think is enough of an upgrade to just drop one of the big hitters. So that's my opinion on it. Let me know down below what you are currently planning structure-wise with your squad, because there is a lot of deviation at the moment. And I sold Haaland, and I'm not necessarily sure that's a much better decision, but I do just think sometimes you just got to suck it up and decide the one player that you don't want to own. So we just spoke about trying to squeeze in all of the expensive players into our team, and budget is an issue at the moment, especially if you're trying to squeeze in those 3 premiums in Son, Salah, and Haaland. And I'm seeing a lot of people panicking about Kieran Trippier, right? He is now 3 weeks in a row got assists. I think it's 5 assists in 3 games for him. He's picking up bonus points. He's picking up clean sheets. And Newcastle looks seriously good at the moment. And Kieran Trippier is a bonus points machine in a really, really good defense on absolutely every single set piece. And when I say every single, like he takes every set piece for them. So he only has to have one moment in a game, and he's probably on a minimum of 6 points due to the bonus that he gets, appearance points, and obviously the attacking return or a clean sheet. Trippier's sort of floor is a lot lower than others, and he has such a high ceiling. So, firstly, is Kieran Trippier a great option? Absolutely. Like one of the, and not the only, one of the main reasons I went without Haaland is because it allowed me to get Trippier alongside Watkins and Salah and Son and Maddison and all of these other players that I wanted to own. If I had Haaland, Son and Salah, Trippier was going to be the one I sacrificed. And a lot of good managers did the same thing. But I'm now seeing those same managers absolutely panicking and trying to break their teams to go without him. And my question would be, what's changed? Apart from the fact that he got another assist, you knew that he was a creative threat. You knew that he would get more points than the likes of Burn, Cher, and Botman. What has changed that is now making you want to break your team? Is it just the attacking returns? Because the data for Trippier is really good, but not mind-blowing. Actually, Matty Cash has better data. Just as an example, the likes of Pedro Porro are getting close as well. There are alternative options at a much cheaper price that are putting up the data that Trippier is. I suppose the thing that we've got with Trippier is his delivery is excellent. It really is. On top of that, the players that he's delivering to are excellent as well. The likes of Wilson and Isak as well tend to finish most of the chances that he delivers. And on top of that, Newcastle are a better defence than the likes of Aston Villa and the likes of Spurs as well for these other defenders, teams that they play for. So there is a lot to like about Trippier, but he is approaching 7 million now. And for me, it's not worth breaking your team to get him in. I'm actually considering selling him in the near future. And the reason for that is he is a lot of money. And when you want to squeeze in all of the attackers that you want, if you want to hold on to the likes of Salah and Haaland and Son, and you're looking to bring in a Saka as well, maybe a Martinelli, I do genuinely think Bruno from GameWeek 11 could be an option, plus the Aston Villa attackers, plus a Bowen. There is only so much that you can do. And I would argue that the best fixtures for Newcastle and for Trippier have already gone, right? The last 3 fixtures have been their best run of fixtures. Crystal Palace this week is great. Wolves away isn't a terrible one. Bournemouth away isn't either. But what I noticed when I looked at their fixtures is Newcastle were much better at home. Most of all, if not all of Newcastle's good upcoming fixtures after game week 9, they're all away. So Wolves is a great fixture. Bournemouth is good. And Everton is good. They're their 3 best fixtures. All 3 are away. And in fact, all of their worst fixtures are at home. You could look at that and say that's a good thing, right? If they're playing at home for their difficult fixtures, you could expect something. And if they're playing away for their easy fixtures, you could still expect something. But this to me would suggest that they don't have any absolute bankers, for apart from maybe Game Week 9, which I still think there's a chance they concede. But they don't have many bankers for clean sheets. And as a result, Trippier really is reliant on continuing to get attacking returns. And he's not going to continue at the rate that he is. So is Trippier essential? No. Is he an absolutely exceptional option that if you can squeeze him in, you should? Yes, but not for a -4 hit, not for a -8 hit, not to sacrifice the likes of Son or the likes of Watkins or the likes of Saka. I prefer all of those options to him because I think there are other defenders that can get you points. Whether that is covering Trippier with a Newcastle defender, such as a Cher or a Botman, or whether that's going for, as I said, the likes of a Matty Cash or a Pedro Porro. I think the only way you put Trippier into your squad is if you're sacrificing one of those three big hitters. If you decide to go without Son, without Salah, without Haaland, then of course you can squeeze him in. But I'm seeing a lot of people thinking about massively downgrading their bench and removing one of their attackers and going into a 4-4-2 just to squeeze Trippier in. And I just don't see it because the data's not suggesting that he's going to continue at 5 assists every 3 games. And if the clean sheets drop off slightly because the fixtures are getting more difficult, and on top of that, the attacking returns drop off slightly as well, then he's just going to go back to being a very decent option, but maybe not worthy of the £7 million price tag. So, I mean, I own him, right? This isn't me saying that I wouldn't own him. I just think you need to be careful that you're not just reacting too much to the last 3 games when their fixtures were absolutely brilliant. Like, I had the likes of Sheffield United and Burnley, and we've spoken about how poor they are at both ends of the pitch. So, I like him. In fact, I love him. He's a great option. But for me, it's not worth breaking your squad to get him in. So the other player that a lot of people are wondering about, should they break their squads to get him in, is Mohamed Salah. And I think this is a different question altogether because Salah, in my opinion, is very, very close to essential over this period. I mean, all you have to do is look at those fixtures. Are you going to feel comfortable not having Salah for that set of fixtures? Everton and Forest at home back-to-back. Luton away. Brentford at home is not a terrible fixture at the moment. Brentford don't look all of that. City away is, of course, the most difficult fixture on paper, but you never know what happens in those big games. And then Fulham, Sheffield United, Crystal Palace. So a lot of the worst defences in the league that they've got coming up, I would want to own Salah for a lot of those. And when you look at the captaincy matrix, i.e. the weeks that you would want to captain Salah, at least 3 of these weeks, and specifically in the weeks that obviously Erling Haaland has a trickier fixture, for example, game week 10, you might want to captain Salah. In future weeks, I think 14 against Fulham at home looks like a great option. 15 against Sheffield United away. I mean, to some extent, game week 11, you could go against Haaland if you wanted to, but you probably would captain him against Bournemouth. So I think you want Salah in your team. Now, the issue is, and the real question that we're answering here, is if we don't have the wildcard, because you've already used it, or you plan to use it in 19, and your team is set up in a position where it's very, very difficult to get Salah, do you just commit to going without him, hope that your team covers him in the way that I've committed to going without Haaland, right? If you go without Salah and you only have one big premium in Haaland, you can get the rest of your team looking super strong. So should you do that? Should you just commit to going without him? Or do you kind of break your team slightly, maybe take a -4 or -8, sell the likes of a Son, a Maddison, maybe you have to sell a Trippier or Watkins to get Salah in? I would lean towards the latter. I just think when you're looking at a player that is putting up the data that he is on penalties, good minutes, excellent fixtures, a history of performing well in the Premier League, and someone that is so reliable for captaincy, it feels crazy to go without Salah for this period here. And it's one of the reasons that I said I prefer Salah to Haaland. Now, would I sell Haaland for Salah this week? I wouldn't. And I would struggle to do it in 10 or 11 as well. You could potentially do it in game week 12, but that's when Salah then has Brentford and City. So I think you've probably got 2 real options here. You hold off on Salah until game week 14, and you sell Haaland in game week 14 for a few weeks, which I'm unsure about. You take a big boy hit and just restructure your team for like a -8 or a -12 to get other players that you want in plus Salah. Or what I think is most likely the best option is in game week 10, you sell Heung-min Son. And yes, Son is also a good option and also has okay fixtures. But I think in game week 9, I like Son's fixture as much as Salah's. From game week 10 onwards, I much prefer Salah's fixtures. I think Salah is a much better captaincy shout in most weeks. And he's got better data and he's a more trustworthy FPL asset. So I think if it's a position where you have Son or Salah, and of course you would have to make some other transfers as well to afford that, I would probably prefer Salah. So all of that together to say it's very team dependent. Like every single team will have a different route to him, and for some it will be much more difficult than others, and some will have more priority transfers. Maybe you've got 4 or 5 flagged players. In that case, bringing in Salah is probably not a priority. But in my opinion, if there is a way to get him for a small hit -4 or -8, and you feel like you can do that and you're not sacrificing too much in your team, yes, I would bring him in. Instead of, in comparison to the likes of Trippier and Watkins, who I think are take it or leave it because there are other good options, I don't think anyone else is getting close to Salah over this period. And I would predict that Salah will be the top point scorer over this period as well. So for me, he's not essential, but I would try to get him in. And he is one of very few players that I would be happy taking a hit to bring in. And I think even more so, if you look at some of the future weeks and you think he is comfortably the best captaincy option, bringing in the best captaincy option for some of these weeks probably makes a lot of sense. So we are going to finish off with captaincy because for me, this is relatively straightforward for the vast majority of you that own Erling Haaland. I would captain Erling Haaland, and this isn't some sort of weird reverse psychology or me trying to jinx it. Haaland is just comfortably the best captaincy option in a week where he has a good fixture, and that will go exactly the same once again in game week 11. But in my opinion, those are the only 2 weeks, 9 and 11, that I looked at from game week 8 to game week 15, 16-ish, when I would like to bring Haaland back in, that I think, yeah, do you know what? He is genuinely, objectively, the only real captaincy option if you have him. And I am happy that in those weeks, I expect Haaland's drafts and Haaland captain to outscore my draft and my captain. And that's fine because you're not looking at individual weeks. Because last week, my non-Haaland draft did better than the Haaland draft. This week, I expect the Haaland drafts to do better and Haaland captaincy to do better. In game week 10, I back myself again. So it's sort of this give and take, and you can only look at it over an entire period. But all of that to say, game week 10, I would be game week 9, I would be captaining Haaland, absolutely. Right? He's got Brighton at home. It was the same reason that I captained Salah last week, because Brighton are a really poor defence this season. They are giving up chances left, right and centre, and especially in these big games, they don't hide. They will absolutely go and press Manchester City and try to beat them at their own game. It's what they did to Liverpool as well, and it's why Salah and Darwin did get some chances. So Haaland, 90-minute man on penalties, great fixture. He's the obvious captaincy option for me. Of course, it is pretty difficult then if you don't own Haaland. Where do you go? Because obviously, Salah's got the early kickoff. We've spoken about this before in the past. There is some research to suggest that there are less goals in the early kickoff. And of course, we know that Klopp really doesn't like it. In the past, Liverpool have struggled. But I'll throw it back to earlier in the season against Wolves in game week 5, I think it was. Just go up here. Liverpool had the early kickoff. Liverpool won 3-1. And on top of that, Salah got 2 assists and 2 bonus points for a 10-pointer. So I'm not saying for a second that that means he's going to get a 10-pointer, but I am suggesting that there is going to be a narrative going around that you can't possibly captain someone in the early kickoff because Son blanked recently and other players have blanked in the past. And as a result, Salah's a terrible captain. Obviously not, but there do often tend to be less goals in that game. And sometimes we do get some upsets as well. On top of that, Everton have just been a very decent defence. They're in the top half of the table for expected goals conceded. They are nowhere near as bad as some of the other defences in this league. For example, Brighton are a worse defence. And the other fixture that you could captain, a Spurs attacker, Fulham are a much worse defence than Everton as well. So I think there are better fixtures to target for sure, but the reason that I currently have the armband on Salah, because of course I don't own Erling Haaland, or maybe if you don't fancy him yourself, even if you do own him, the reason is consistency. The numbers are there every single week for Salah. He will play 90 minutes every single week. He's on penalties as well. And he is fantastic at home at Anfield. So I think there is a lot going for him. Whilst the early fixture isn't great, and whilst I don't think Everton are necessarily a team to target, I kind of back Salah against absolutely anyone at the moment. And he feels like the safest, most reliable captaincy option that I've got. I think Son's ceiling may well be higher this week. But Son is a real fitness and injury doubt at the moment. And whatever Ange Postecoglou comes out and says, Son just appears to be limping in every game. He's playing between 65 and 80 minutes in every single game as well. He continued to limp in the international break too when he's playing for his international team. So we're in a position now where I don't think Son is fully fit and I expect him to get an early sub. And so when I look at potentially as little as 65 to 70 minutes for Son against what I think is, again, a better fixture in Fulham at home, or Salah for 90 minutes against Everton at home, I think I back Mohamed Salah. So it's more about the consistency, the reliability and the minutes, more so than me thinking this Everton at home fixture in the early kickoff is a great one. So I do have doubts about it. I'm not overly happy about captaining Salah, but I think if you don't have Haaland or you don't want to go for Haaland, Salah is the second best option. But for me, if you've got Haaland, it's just an obvious one. And I am absolutely terrified this week. This is the week I'm expecting to get an absolute beating and for my rank to get battered. But I'm hoping in the weeks surrounding that I can also get some decent green arrows. And I hope this week that whoever I choose to captain instead of Haaland, which will probably be Salah, I hope that they can at least get close to the Norwegian. So guys, there you have it. That is my deadline decisions video for Game Week 9. Hopefully this weekly series is helpful for you. It's new to this season, but I think you guys seem to be enjoying it, which is good. And if you did enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button. Let's aim for 2,000 likes on the video, and make sure to subscribe as well. I do really appreciate the support. Make sure to tune into the deadline stream tomorrow as well on Saturday morning. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.